Thank you, Patrick. Thanks for being here with us this afternoon. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Michael Pantell. He is the principal engineer of Waterway Engineering. He was the floodplain modeler stationed at the Emergency Operations Center following the July 4th flood event, where his modeling was used directly by search and recovery teams to assist in the immediate aftermath of the flood. Michael's specialty is all things floodplain and drainage, ranging from master drainage planning and land development services to real-time flood early warning system and legislative consulting. Please join me in welcoming Michael Pantell.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. Let's see if this clicker works. So far, it works. All right. So my name is Michael Pantell with Waterway Engineering. Thank you, Lane, for the wonderful introduction. Just y'all to kind of, I mean, Waterway Engineering, probably most of you haven't heard of. We're a small firm here in Folsom. Folsom, where I used from, Flower Mound. I was originally from Folsom. Long story. And this is kind of what I do, or what we do as a firm, mostly land development. That's my background, at least for the last 5 years. Before that, when I was in Folsom and Sacramento, we did a lot more. I did a lot more dam modeling and levee modeling back in California. So this does say emergency response analysis. That's very new. That's actually something I've really started since July. But one of the kind of the question I keep getting asked whenever I bring this up, other than the technical work, which I think probably maybe 10-15% of this room's like really interested in the technical work, is the story behind how I got there. So I'm going to try to kind of give you the story with some technical work. So for those technical people, this will be fun. For those people who just like the story, this might also be enjoyable. Um, so this is kind of my background. Like I said, let's see if I can get through this. My background's from California. I am an Aggie. So for all you A&M people, UC Davis, we are Aggies. I tell people that. Thank you. I can see an Aggie in the room. All right. I did get my master's. My bachelor's was in geology. My master's was in civil engineering at Sac State. I moved my family to DFW in 21. So I'm very new to Texas, and I started Waterway Engineering in 22. Basically, it was an excuse not to go back to the office, and I thought I could make it happen, and it's kind of worked out. So the question is, how on earth did I end up in Kerrville? Well, I'm going to give you kind of the short, truncated story, but it all started when I met a good friend of mine, Mike Wellborn, down in. He has an engineering firm in Kerrville. He's a site civil, and as Waterway, I don't do site civil work really. I do your detention ponds and your channel designs and HECRAS models. So I have a lot of friends who are site civils, especially smaller companies. They love coming to me and saying, "Hey, help me out." Most of you like this is honestly, guys, I'll tell you, this is an old presentation. I sent the wrong one. So luckily it has almost all the stuff. And I just did this one a few months ago. But this is great. I'm doing great, guys. Thank you. Um, it's been a long couple of weeks. I can get into that later. So Mike Wellborn sent me this text message. This came from his phone. It was actually a property we developed together. It's a little bit hard to see, so I think this next one will zoom in. Perfect. That's the Guadalupe River. That is a property that is the Southern Oaks Baptist Church that I did the floodplain modeling for. It's right on the Guadalupe. I told them they needed like 6 or 10 feet of fill, and they were really complaining until July 4th. And they saw this and they went, "Yeah, cool. We'll keep putting in that fill." Um, so, so July 4th rolls around. I'm up here in DFW. I'm actually up in Robeson Ranch hanging out with my family. And I have like like most of you probably had a curiosity what happened, so I went home and started developing my model. When I got home that afternoon from Robeson Ranch, July 4th, I just started pulling the day together. So 4th through the 8th, that would be like whatever Friday through Monday or so. I collected some terrain data. I was looking at rainfall, just some real basic stuff, just trying to kind of piece together sort of what happened. I won't pretend like I was an expert in all rainfall analysis and stuff at the time. I've learned a lot since then. But it was learning on the fly. So I went down on the 9th. I went down to Kalahari down in Round Rock with my wife and my pregnant wife at the time and my 4 kids on vacation. It was pre-planned. And so I was down there hanging out, and on the 10th in the morning, this would be, I think, Thursday morning, I got a call from Mike Wellborn saying, "I got Charlie Hastings, the county engineer, coming in my office. You need to be on the phone in 30 minutes. I'm like, "Okay, sure." And so 30 minutes later, he gives me a call and I start having that conversation with Charlie. And he's like, you know, he's panicking, a little bit emotional. I mean, lots going on in his life right now. And I totally get that. He wants to know what's going on. Um, and so I started sharing those results with him, just saying, hey, like, here's this kind of model I've put together. Here's some depth, some floodplain, extents. Started sharing it with DPS over the next couple of days, saying, hey, Charlie, no, you can't say it's a 10,000 year event. You should probably back that off a little bit. And like, no, it's not a PMP and all that kind of stuff. But whether or not he listens to me is it's up to him. But this is basically the next 3 days of my life is sitting in this hotel room. In fact, there's a little bed right there. See if my arrow pops up. I think there it is. That was my office for like 3 days. So I will say it was a nice hotel room with 4 kids in it, but it was doing water slides and then coming back and running models on a bed for the most part. It was not the most comfortable, but I was being asked questions and I felt like I needed to respond. I needed to give them something. And so on this would be Saturday now. So this is now almost about a week and a half later. Charlie and I were discussing whether or not I needed to come down to Kerrville. And I get told that he tells me there's a meeting at 1 o'clock with the National Weather Service and Harris County Flood Control. And basically from there, we realized that no one had a 2D rain on grid model. There was nothing really there for the DPS to use, and National Weather Service wasn't going to make it, and Harris County Flood Control was just punching high water marks. It's not really their role. But they had a lot of data. So they all gave me their rainfall data, their graded rainfall data, and their high water marks, which was great. And so the 14th, this would be now Saturday morning, Sunday morning, sorry. I get up, I'm on vacation. So I went and I just went to the store, grabbed a bunch of like boots and pants because I'm like, it's July, so I don't have shorts. I didn't need pants. And I rented a car and left. I mean, my kids went up back home, and I went down to Kerrville to have to be at the OC. So I'll talk a little bit about the hydraulic model. For people who do hydraulic models, it's not that interesting, honestly. It's a 2D rain on grid model. So it's really you use HEC-RAS, you get your area, and you put together your mesh and your cells. Add a bunch of break lines, I think is the next thing this thing will say. There we go. Here we go. This is what I want to give you. There we go. So it extends all the way down to Canyon Lake. So you can actually see, let's see if I can use the pointer here without pushing the wrong button. That's Canyon Lake. The South Fork is that bit right there. Sorry, people online, you can't see this. You've got the South Fork, that's about Camp Mystic. Kerrville's right in that area. It extends all the way down to Canyon Lake. It's the whole watershed. It's pretty coarse, 125 foot to 500 foot grid cell, cell size grid, and it's about 350,000 cells in total. I did have a time at Saturday night, like 10 o'clock at night, to throw 3 bridges in there and run it before I had to leave. And then it uses MRMS, multi-radar, multi-sensing rainfall grid data, which is MRMS, and I'll kind of go into that. But that's the extent of the model. I built it. It runs in about 3 hours. It had to run in 3 hours because I don't have 24 or 48 hours to run it. I needed to get the data out there. So it was just quick runs. Is it right? Does it make sense? Yes or no? Fix and repeat. All right, so we're going to take a quick aside to quantitative precipitation estimates, QPEs. What kind of rain data did I put in? What kind of rain data is available to put into these rain on grid models? And there's 2 options actually. So this is NOAA's MRMS data, like I said earlier, and you'll see, I believe this will point this out here. Yeah, so it's a little bit, it's a higher resolution grid cell. It's like 1 square kilometer. It does underestimate the peak rainfall, and I'll get into why I know that later. But basically, it's showing a 3-hour rainfall depth of about 8.72 inches, which is just about, that's the South Fork watershed it's falling on, and it's just southwest of Camp Mystic. There is another type of rainfall data, which is stage 4. Now, stage 4 is a little coarser, same kind of file structure. It's read natively in RAS, so it's really easily just to kind of plug it in. It's about 4 square kilometer grid cell size, but it does give you a better peak result. So it underestimates a little bit less than the other one, and it's about 11 inches. So you saw about 11 inches, and it's probably closer to, it's way higher than 11 inches, but I'll get into that. But those are your 2 options. I had to use MRMS because stage 4 is not available at the time when you're running. So it's kind of a weird scenario where like MRMS is available every hour and you can pull it. But stage 4, you have to like wait a month and a half before it shows up on some archive site. So that's kind of, it creates sort of an issue, and it's the National Weather Service talking to each other basically. That is where that comes from. Um, Model accuracy. So this will be really good. Okay, so the model, what the nice thing about having the Harris County Flood Control District high water marks was that I could tell whether or not the model was performing correctly. That was kind of a big deal, right? So you run a model, but you don't really know if it's working right. You had, a week in a hotel room to put it together. Maybe you're sleep deprived and you're not really sure whether it's working. So this was great. I had this is a kind of a table of sort of like average differences, and that kind of can hide some highs and lows, but honestly it was a pretty good model run through the South Fork. It was a little low in the South Fork. It came out about right through Kerrville, and then it kind of diverges quite a bit as you get downstream of Comfort. But it was great because I needed that to verify the actual model results. Like I said, it generally underestimates through most of Kerr County, but there are places where it's pretty accurate. And that might be because of debris loading and some other things that kind of pop up in modeling. Like we're modeling clean water versus like stuff, right? There's usually stuff in the water that can cause bigger rises. This is a water surface profile of South Fork. And so you can see right the red line there that you see in front of you. That's the model results. That's the maximum result across the entire river reach. And it has the high watermark points. And you can see it pretty well matches. Obviously the scales are it's pretty hard to tell, but it's about a few, and it's 1 to 3 feet off somewhere in some places, but it's pretty good. Can I go next one? So the results. I could show you videos and I think you would see it and maybe it'd be like, it's okay. I actually have a YouTube channel if you really want to see some videos, but I find the best place to look at the results are on paper and they are right out in front. So some of you saw it on the way in. I'd recommend you go and look at it. This is the one I put up at the EOC. This was really cool putting it up. I got to hear a lot of great stories that came out of it. Yeah, so I recommend go out there. There's flow. So when you get out there, can't miss it. And the South Fork is on the far left side. So that's the part you probably want to look at. This one. There we go. So kind of the rest of the story. I told you how I got there, right? So Charlie calls me. I'm on vacation. I go down there. When I roll in on Sunday, I met with Charlie. He brought me into the EOC. This is my first time at an EOC. If any of you have an EOC, Emergency Operations Center experience, it's kind of surreal because it's like really like calm for as like chaotic as what we're going through. But one of the things I noticed when I got in there was like who was there and kind of who wasn't. From what I thought, what I would expect to be there. You had Parks and Wildlife and National Weather Service and FEMA and TDEM and all these people. I didn't see any floodplain people, which I thought was kind of odd at the time. Now, I know now, and this isn't to blame anybody or cast stones, it's just TDEM's role is emergencies, and that's their role, and no other state agency is responsible for emergencies. And so there's this kind of interesting place where, like, in an emergency, who helps provide that data? And that's kind of a gap that we still have. So giving up the data. So when I got there, I sit down with, this is John Miller from Texas DPS, and John Miller was a cool guy. He was actually in charge of the search and operations he's doing all the searches, right? And we get in, I sit down, I start showing him the model, and he goes, well, where are we looking? How is the model looking? And I start showing him the extent. He goes, we're not looking in the right place. So they're searching kind of in the river, and this is now 10 days later, and all that high watermark data is gone. All the information to say, hey, how high the water got is all been, washed away. People have tromped out there. You've had multiple rainstorms since then. So they were kind of doing the best to figure out where to look, but they don't really know anymore. And they realized they were not searching nearly far enough out and not nearly upstream. So this was one of the first things I got to provide for them, which was incredibly helpful. So you can see in that green, that's basically more or less kind of where they were originally searching. It was near the river channel. They would run their search dogs through a few times and their search crews to look for debris. But the real flood extent was much, much further out. In fact, you'll see that in this case, it was about 3/4 of a mile upstream from the, that kind of original search extent. Go. All right, so developing the map. why did I print out a map to begin with? So this was kind of another question I keep getting, and I think it's kind of a fun story. So Charlie's like, you need to print out. Charlie Hastings, county engineer, is like, I just need to show this story. I need to tell the story. And I'm like, okay, Charlie. And so one morning I get up at like 4 a.m. And I'm actually staying at Mike Wellborn's house, the friend who brought me in. And I'm sitting at his kitchen table, and I'm just started like, I'm going to start working on this map. And so I start putting this thing together. And lo and behold, later that day, I get a call from Charlie. It's like now 5 hours later. He goes, the governor's coming. You have to get here. I'm like, okay. All right. So once again, Mike Wellborn helped me out a lot. I printed out he let me use his plotter. I printed everything out and I ran over to the EOC. And that's where I got to put it up. Hopefully. Yeah, there we go. So that was a picture of me this is before I put it up. That's Nim Kid. For those of you who don't know, he's kind of a big deal, is what I was told afterwards. I had no idea who he was at the time. He's a nice guy. And so I started showing him the map, and it wasn't until about an hour later when everybody started like following him around that I realized he's like the head of TDM. And so I was showing them the maps, started putting them up. I think we brought in a bunch of high school students to help tape it up and put it together, tape it together and put it up. That was a cool experience. Maybe show you the next slide. Help me out. There we go. This was a cool experience. Everybody in the room helped. You could see everyone from Nim Kid. I think Charlie's probably taking a picture or he's in there. Everybody in the room helped put this thing up. It was a cathartic experience for them. Like you could tell right away, like you put this thing up and people came and started talking. I'm like, hey, like I was here when this thing happened, and this was, this is how I saw the flood, and oh yeah, this is my mom's house, or this was where we found somebody. Like all those kind of stories. Really, something I will never forget. But it was a very cool experience to have everyone help and put it up. So for those engineers, when you want to display work, I think this is kind of a cool story there. There you go. There's me meeting the governor. It's just Charlie did most of the talking. It was really fun. He hugged the governor. I did not hug the governor. I'm just gonna throw that out there. Charlie's great. I love Charlie. I would never. I couldn't do it. That's my thing. I was like, all right. So afterwards, I'm gonna get myself in trouble. I'm sorry. So after I left there, I said, okay, I've done all this great work, I guess. I mean, it's cool work and it's interesting. Now what? And I was like, oh, I should probably put everything we know into a document. And so that's what I did. So I wrote this. Oh, fighting now. We got to go way back. Oh, here we go. All right, sorry about that. So I put together a document of all the things we knew, and that was everything from the model that I developed to the rainfall amounts to kind of estimating rainfall peaks, everything to kind of help assess the situation from like both a hydrologic and hydraulic perspective. So let's talk about the rain. So here is our 3-hour rainfall event, and you can see there's gauge points for the same time frame. I think that's 3 hours or 6 hours, one of the two, I can't remember. But you have those rain gauges right there. And you can see that there's the K7 gauge, which is a UGRA gauge, has a 12 inches of rain, but then it's in this like 8 to 9 contour. So we know that the MRMS, we know that the QPE stuff is off. We know it's off by a few inches. And so I was like, all right, well, how far off is this, and what would be an actual like estimated peak? So I went ahead and calculated the differences. This isn't rocket science, right? I mean, you just take the difference and shift it over and say, what is the actual peak? I did it for both the MRMS and stage 4, although I don't think MRMS isn't in the report, or stage 4 isn't in the report. I did do it. So here's my estimate for return periods. You have the 6-hour on the bottom and the 3-hour on top. The way around, one of the two, I can't remember. But you could see all the different return period on the x-axis there, and that tells you kind of what both we measured, right? So K7 and K, what was measured, that would be 6 hours there. It measured around, I think, I don't know, 688-year event. There you go. So it's pretty high. And then but once we start doing the estimates of how far off the QPE were, you're way exceeding 1,000 year. I did a PMP, probable maximum precip. If you guys are curious, it was about 60 to 83% in 3 hours. So this was a ton of water. Later, when I was meeting with the girls from Count Mystic down in Dallas, I did this back in December, which was another cool experience. But I think I went and calculated the actual volume. It was about the volume of Lake Arlington going through South Fork in about 3 hours, just to kind of give you like the amount. It's a dam breach, I mean, essentially at that point. This is also return periods for flow. So I was able to get that from an existing Army Corps hydrologic model. So really the South Fork got hit by the most of it. You can see there on the second line that the flow is about 100,000 CFS in the model. That's way above the 1,000-year. And that's all of that water gets funneled down to the Guadalupe. And of course, the watershed gets much bigger at that point. So the return period drops quite a bit. Lesson learned. So we have a gap here in the state, and this is something that we've been working on. The legislators have also been working on this. They passed SB 1, SB 3, and SB 5, right? The campground laws, and then there's the siren laws. So all the counties now have to have sirens. The sirens need to be triggered off of something, and that's great. And they've also paid for Texas Tech to do a lot of meteorological data, which is great. We've also just in general as a state, paid for BLE data, which is awesome again. There's other data already out there. There's National Weather Service models. There's TxDOT FAST system, which is a real-time flood warning system. But there's all this data out there that is already existing or is being created right now as we speak. And then there is this, data user, actually people who use it, right? There's the TDEMs, the emergency responders, there's the local engineers, and there is this gap. Now, I will say this probably says TFMA on it because I originally made this presentation for TFMA, so I'm sorry. Get to that. So who fills that gap? And that is a question that is something that we, as a engineering industry, has kind of need to still work on. I think there's a role there, possibly for TFMA, possibly for the state, or this Water Integration Task Force, even better. So this is an idea that I've been kind of working on with several different state universities, UT Arlington, UT Austin. I was just on the phone with A&M about it this morning, about finding a way to fill this gap. Now, I will say the legislators had the idea of doing this through SB 2. It didn't pass, but at some point, and this is something that needs to be worked on as a state, is how do we get this? Why am I the first one in the room on a flood event? Right? I'm some random guy in Flower Mound up here. Where's the structure in place to respond to emergencies and actually create the data and develop the data or get the data, whatever they need to do, into the Emergency Operations Center so that we don't have people searching blind for 10 days. Something like this where it's probably under TDEM, honestly, that needs to happen, but it needs to be supported by TxDOT and Water Development Board and the local river agencies and all the myriad of people who are creating data on a regular basis. It needs to be fed somewhere. And that's something that I've been kind of pushing since mostly September, that on both the state level and the local levels as I help develop these flood early warning systems for local counties. And on top of that, just talking to state legislators saying, hey, we need this. And there is an understanding there that we need this. This is something where ASCE could also play a role where it's like, we as engineers have a role in emergency response. Now, it shouldn't be the role. I don't want to stamp emergency response work, no offense, but I still think there's a role for our expertise to be in that room at the time. I think that's the end. Yeah, there you go. Thank you.